Good morning. This is the European Business Channel. I'm Ed Mitchell. Here are the headlines. Following yesterday's unprecedented resignation of the East German government, the country's Central Committee meets later today to decide on new members and new reforms. Even the Politburo now looks under threat. Meanwhile, the tide of loaded Trabants continues to flow out. Czechoslovakia is waving the refugees through without any questions. And in Moscow, the traditional Red Square march past was countered not far away by a demonstration by 5,000 protesters calling for an end to one-party government. Some carried pre-1917 Russian flags. People power in East Germany is producing some stunning results. The growing tide of demands for free elections, the accelerating exodus of the country's best and brightest, and the deepening conviction that the authorities have lost control of events produced yesterday's historic resignation of East Germany's government. The departure of the 40-minister cabinet has paved the way for a reshuffle of the communist leadership at an emergency session of the party's Central Committee, which starts later today. A meeting that could result in the resignation of the party's ruling 18-man Politburo. With approaching 200,000 people now having made their opinions known by leaving the country, and with demonstrations of 500,000 now frequent, the pressure is on Communist leader Egon Krenz to come up with some urgent and radical reforms. This report by Stefan Pernau.
The Ministerial Council proposed the motion to the President of the People's Chamber.
The idea was resignation as a positive strategy, and it came from one of the ministers as a reaction to the nation's unrest. It was meant as a gesture of support for party leader Egon Krenz, helping his decision on who should be in his government. Not surprisingly, the opposition sees little change.
The real government is the Politburo, and if they were serious about change, the Politburo ought to resign, and not the Ministerial Council.
No celebrations as such, but in the streets people were pleased by the resignation of the elderly governing clique.
Yes, that's good. Why not?
Well, at last something new is happening. Yes, I'm pleased.
It could be a new beginning.
With repeated calls for change on the streets and the protesters growing ever more confident, time is running out for the government. Popular opinion in the East German capital has it that the communists' claim to leadership can't be upheld much longer. It seems it's not just new faces that are called for, but a new political system. And if rapid change is not forthcoming, today's relatively calm protests could soon be seen as the calm before the storm.
Stefan Pernau reporting. Clearly, the dramatic developments in East Germany have their most direct impact on West Germany, on its people, its economy, and of course on its politics. The huge influx of refugees has its costs and its benefits, while the prospect of the reunification of the two Germanys is having a profound impact on West Germany's attitude to the future of Europe. West German Cabinet Secretary Rudolf Seiters last night spoke to the European Business Channel about his country's response to the turmoil across the wall.
Basically, the people are focusing their energies on changing the entire system. They want, indeed, are demanding a new beginning. Naturally, this has to include the resignation of the old guard. And in my opinion, what the people want to have next is free elections with complete political pluralism.
And with just weeks to go before President Bush meets President Gorbachev in the Mediterranean, Bush said there is no turning back from the radical changes taking place in Eastern Europe. The process, he said, had gone too far. It's now irreversible. You cannot now contain the people's hopes for freedom, he said. Well, on the question of the refugees, the Bonn government needs to tackle two key problems: where to house all these people, and can they all be found productive jobs? On the issue of reunification, it's a matter of not only profound importance to the shape of Europe in the future, but also the fundamental balance between the superpowers. This report by Pascal Coutard.
Yesterday, more than 5,000 East Germans crossed the border to West Germany, with a further 300 per hour still coming via Czechoslovakia. Now, the mass exodus is beginning to cause problems for the West Germans, particularly as far as accommodating the refugees is concerned.
In a city like Stuttgart, 4,000 people are waiting for a better flat and are on the social ministry's waiting list. Now, should 5,000 or 10,000 refugees flood into Stuttgart, also asking for accommodation, then you really have an explosive situation on your hands.
schwer zu bewältigende Konfliktlage.
In reaction, Bonn yesterday announced a $4.5 billion investment in subsidized housing for the refugees over the next 4 years. But finding jobs for all the newcomers could prove more difficult. And that concern is shared across the board. Yesterday, Ernst Breit, head of the West German Trade Union Congress, said West Germany wasn't a workers' paradise, while the president of the Employers Association, Klaus Muhrmann, warned there was a limit to how many more workers could be absorbed. Despite these warnings, the East Germans are still pouring to the West, raising the question whether the influx could eventually lead to the reunification of Germany.
If the moment comes when East Germany is free to join West Germany, that will be accepted by the Western European nations as a development which we welcome.
West German officials also point out that reunification wouldn't present a major problem for the EC.
Wenn dieser Prozess aber Erfolg hat,
If the process turns out to be successful, I could imagine that in the year 2000 a country like Hungary, Poland or East Germany could join the community of free European nations.
und dann wird in
And in
einem
a united Europe,
Europa
Germany's borders will not be so important.
keine Rolle mehr.
Put differently, we'll have a reunited Germany in the framework of a united Europe.
Einheit Deutschlands in einem vereinigten Europa.
Pascal Coutin reporting. Well, joining us now on the line this morning is East German expert, Professor David Charles of Nottingham University. David, good morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Can Egon Krenz and the Central Committee come up with reforms fast enough to actually avert disaster?
It doesn't look like it, but what we saw last night was just a first step. There will have to be much more fundamental reforms than we've seen so far.
And those fundamental reforms must mean free elections, surely?
I would think that is, without doubt, the most important single thing that the people of the GDR want.
And that means recognition, say, of the new party, the new Forum?
And the other groups that are rapidly forming themselves in the GDR.
Now, where is this leading? Clearly the pressure is building up, or at least events are unfolding that might allow a process towards reunification of Germany, either within Europe or within German boundaries. How fast is that going to come?
Well, no one can give the answer to that. Those two men who are meeting on the battleship in the Mediterranean, is it later this month, they will have a lot to say about it, but at the same time, the people of the GDR, for the first time, will also have a lot to say. They will be deciding their own fate on the streets of the GDR.
Do you think that pressure, in some senses, is now irresistible? In the words of President Bush, the reforms so far are now irresistible. They cannot be turned back.
Unless there is panic in the Soviet leadership, I think it is irresistible. I think it will be carried forward. And one would expect some kind of free elections followed by reunification in a relatively short time. I don't think that the security factor, which everybody seems to think is a major problem, is really a problem, because the two parts of Germany that have always been one nation, even if they've been two states, they could be reunited, and the territories that are now in NATO and the Warsaw Pact could actually remain in those pacts. The troops of the two major powers, or indeed the four major powers, could stay exactly where they are, in West Germany for NATO, in the what is now the GDR for the Warsaw Pact.
Right. Professor,
even in a united Germany.
Thanks very much again for joining us this morning.
Right.
Thanks a lot. Speak to you again, I hope. Professor David Charles, live on the line from Nottingham University.